Howdy, class. Humanities 2, Shasta College, fall. We've got a couple more days in fall, then Halloween. Get your costumes together. Make sure they have a mask. And hope you don't get too much candy because then you'll get diabetes and be on insulin the rest of your life. Beware out there. It's a crazy world we're living in these times. The weather is nice today, so I'm not going to complain about that. The fires appear to be out for now. The skies are clear. We turned back our clocks this week. That's right. It's going to get dark now, 4:30 or whatever. Anyway, hope you're taking care and staying healthy and out of trouble, as they say. Can still talk about writers the rest of the week. We're spending quite a bit of time on writers because they are worth it. Hopefully you've seen you saw my last lecture and you're looking at the last of the documentaries of whatever I signed, Hemingway and whatnot. And today I'm going to sign more, plus an essay that'll be due next week, be essay number 5. I'll give you a choice probably to write about. And when you write about these writers, I just I reiterate this every time. I just don't want a thumb sketch bio taken right out of Wikipedia. I want you to do some research on them, not just maybe read a page or two of a book they've written. It's all online. You can find all this stuff. You know how to find it. Read a couple of pages. You might be surprised that you want to read the whole book one day. Look at a couple of documentaries to do the research. Go deeper on their life. Don't just tell me when they're born and where they were raised and how they died. I want to know what makes them them. Think about this. What makes you who you are? Do you just want to be known for the date you're born, the date you went to school, the date you got a job, and your death date? Is that all you want to be known for? Who are you? So look at these people and dissect them and try to figure out, besides they've written some great pieces of literature, how did it come about? What was in them that made them write this stuff? You're going to have to do a little bit of research on that. It's all there. There's a ton of stuff on all these writers online. So today I'm going to mostly talk about exclusively post-World War II writers. Now, everybody actually from 1945 on to modern day writers is considered post-World War II, but not anymore. We're post other wars now. We got the Vietnam War, we got Afghanistan War, so we're long past World War II. But these writers came out of World War II. Most of them were drafted into the Army, and they wrote about their experiences in way different ways. James Jones wrote about it in a more realistic way in his books, like From Here to Eternity or The Thin Red Line, about actual guys in combat on Guadalcanal and whatnot. And then guys like Norman Mailer, he came out of the military and he wrote his Naked and the Dead. And then he also wrote many, many others later that weren't so based in, I guess you call it naturalism. He wrote many years later Executioner's Song, which is a wonderful book, wonderful about a serial killer, and many, many other books. And he was known as a raconteur. He used to be on talk shows all the time. Yes, folks, they used to have writers on talk shows. Think about that now. What writer goes on a talk show now? And what do you think I'm talking about talk shows? I'm talking about all of them, even though they're all quarantined right now, from Conan to Stephen Colbert. They mostly just have actors who come on to promote a movie or something. But there was a time where in this country, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where writers were really held way up here in the cultural status. And writers like Truman Capote and Norman Mailer and Gore Vidal were really esteemed, and they were good at selling their works by selling who they were. We bought their books because of them. This is long before the internet, long before YouTube, long before social media. And so you had to get out there and sell yourself. So it just wasn't good enough to sell your book and the contents in your book. You had to create a persona, and most of these people did. And they had the persona of the eccentric writer. Jack Kerouac came out of Merchant Marines, and he wrote his famous novel On the Road, which changed an entire cultural generation. He came out with that book, and it changed everything there is to change. It was called, and he created possibly what they call the Beat Generation, and there was many writers in that atmosphere of poets like Allen Ginsberg and William Burroughs, although he didn't really say he was from the Beat Generation. He was from the generation before that because he's a little older than everybody. But these guys came out of World War II, and they wanted to experience life to the fullest. They wanted to, yes, folks, take methamphetamines, listen to jazz, drive all night, and possibly have sex with women and men. And they were open to the endless possibilities of what jazz could bring. And they created an entire ethos of that led to the hippie generation. Hippies without beatniks would not exist. And some of these writers like Kerouac, they essentially created an entire genre and lifestyle of people who were looking for something extra, not just the normal get a job, buy a house, have 2.1 kids, have 2.1 cars, and grow old in the same house with the same woman. They wanted something more. They came out of the war experiencing something most of us never have experienced, most of us never will, unless you're a veteran who has experienced combat. We really don't know. These people wrote about it. Now, somebody like Kurt Vonnegut wrote a satirical novel about it called Slaughterhouse-Five. I highly recommend you read this book. It will open your eyes to new frontiers, new meanings of our humanity, and how to handle warfare with humor. The terror of war brought to you through with humor. Maybe you know the story of Slaughterhouse-Five. Kurt Vonnegut in real life was captured and held as a prisoner of war. And he was held as a prisoner of war in a place called Dresden in Germany. And towards the end of the war, possibly after Hitler was already dead, we didn't know if he's dead or alive, but the war was definitely over. I mean, Germany had lost, but we were getting payback. We were paying back for all the stuff they put the rest of the world through. And here's Dresden, which was not a military town. It was known for its beauty, its art, its culture, and these little glass figurines that everybody throughout the world bought from Dresden. Well, we decided to flatten it to get some payback against the Nazis, and Vonnegut happened to be a prisoner of war there, and he went down to the basement with all the other prisoners of war, and the bombers came, American bombers, and they literally destroyed the entire city, and it had no military. It was definitely a revenge payback. They came out of those basements and they came out to a city that no longer existed. And he wrote a novel about it. He saw the horrors of war, but he saw the humor and the fallacies of man. And there's a lot of them, folks. But you got to have a good mind to think through that stuff. Joseph Heller's another one who did the same thing with his wonderful book called Catch 22, which was made into a movie by Mike Nichols, which was made into a TV series recently, which I thought was excellent. The book is about a bombardier pilot stationed in Italy, and he wants out of the war. He's flown his missions. He's flown his 20 missions, but then they go, you got to fly 30 missions. He thinks they are breaking the rules of their contract. Then they keep raising it to 30, 35 missions, 40 missions. Now he's trying to get out. And what he has to go through and what's going on around him is really surreally comic and terrifying. Catch 22. It was a book that changed everything, and that the dialogue or the phrase Catch 22 became part of our lexicon, part of our dialogue. People say it to this day. You probably don't even know what it means. Maybe you do. Maybe you've heard it. Maybe you haven't. You could use it now, folks. Essentially, he asked Yossarian, that's his name, asked the doctor, who was a doctor, if he could say he's unfit for warfare. The doctor goes, well, I can't do that, because if you ask me to make you unfit for warfare, that means you're sane. And that means you are fit for warfare. And he goes, what do you mean? He goes, you have to be insane, and I have to say you're unfit for warfare. And he says, well, how do I do that? He goes, well, you can't ask for it, because that makes it sound like you're not insane. And he calls it a catch-22. There's no way out. There's no way to answer it. There's no way you're helpless. I'm not explaining it very well. Anyway, huge influential book that influenced the entire generation, my generation, and people who came before me. Norman Mailer wrote his Naked and the Dead, and it's more or less a realistic, I told you about him already, depiction of his war experience. James Jones was obviously, he was as realistic, but Vonnegut and Joseph Heller chose to go a surrealistic way. They take reality and they twist it around so you would examine it from another point of view, because nothing is what it looks like. Nothing is what it should be. And that's how clever the pros were. There was very few women writing in these days, but one of them was Flannery O'Connor. She wrote exclusively in the 50s, because she died before she got very old. She's one of my all-time favorite writers. Didn't write very many books, wrote a bunch of short stories. Her most famous novels would be a few good, I'm trying to think of the titles right now, but her main title that sticks with me is Wise Blood, about a guy who comes out of the army and now he wants to be a preacher, what they call a street corner preacher. These are all set in the deep South, where they have a lot of these street corner preachers, and Hazel Motes comes out of the army, and he wants to start a new church called the Church of Jesus Christ without Jesus Christ. So he's preaching to start a church without Jesus Christ. That's not an easy thing to do, folks. And it's a surreally dark comic dive into somebody who's psychotic, sociopath brilliance. Flannery was born and raised in the South. She's been accused of being a racist writer. She probably is. Um, you don't see it too much in the fiction, but in her interviews, you definitely do. You could go online right now and listen to her talk. Um, so she's got an asterisk on her name, meaning yes, she was full on Southern, born and raised in the South, and believed that the African Americans were inferior to the day she died. Hold that against her, okay. Read her fiction and try to put that other stuff aside because it's brilliant. Does that forgive it? Does it make up for it? That's up to you. She's got a name like a man. When I first read Flannery O'Connor, I thought it was a man because I go, what kind of name is Flannery? I was reading this book thinking the whole time it was a man. And then this is before we had internet and could Wikipedia everything. This would be in the 70s when I read this thing in college, and it haunted me. The book is haunting, Wise Blood, and I've read all her short stories. I adore them. She taught at the Iowa Workshop, which is a famous workshop for creative writers. Folks, my degree is in creative writing. I have a master's of fine arts in creative writing, so I've studied creative writing all my life. So this is literally right up my alley, as you would say it. And so she studied and taught at the Iowa Workshop, which is the premier creative writing master's program you could get into. Some of our greatest writers in history of this country taught there or graduated out of there. She was teaching there in the 50s. And she had lupus, which is nowadays it's a sort of a controllable lifelong disease. They control with drugs, but in the 50s they couldn't do too good with it. Her father died of it at a young age, and Flannery made it to about 38 years old, and she died of lupus. And a great literary figure died way too young. She's considered a Southern Gothic writer, and she hated that title because there's a lot of writers that come under that title. What does that mean? Well, they were born and raised in the South, and there's a Gothic. What makes it Gothic? It's hard to explain. You got to read this stuff. There is a haunting quality to it, not unlike a horror movie. You read Wise Blood, it's like you're reading a horror movie, but the ghost is all in the guy's mind. Same thing with some of the great Southern writers like Erskine Caldwell, who wrote it's about gonna get what did he write? God's Little Acre, which is hilariously funny and terrifying. Modern Southern Gothic writers would be Harry Crews, who I thought was brilliant. He taught creative writing at the University of Florida until recently when he died. His books are brilliant and terrifying. His book, Feast of Snakes, it's about religious ceremonies in the South where they worship the snake, and they have interactions with rattlesnakes. They think if Jesus loves them, the rattlesnake won't kill them. But over the years, they're called snake handlers, folks. That's Southern Gothic. That's pure. Think about that, handling a rattlesnake, and hopefully it doesn't zap you in the neck. They do, folks. A lot of the snake handlers ended up dead, and then they banned that from happening. His book, Feast of Snakes, is a wonderful Southern Gothic beauty. Later on, writers like who wrote Big Bad Love, Larry Brown, was writing in the same vein as Flannery O'Connor just 20 years later. He died early too, 53 years old. And Big Bad Love is is a wonderful book. It's one of these books influenced me to write, to start try to come up with my own voice as a writer. That's how influential they were. What other writer do I want to talk about before I shut up? John Steinbeck was not a post-World War II writer. He possibly, don't take my word for it, research it, he might be the greatest 20th century writer of all time. I would put him in that category. His books were, he wrote books in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. He wrote all up. He died in the early 70s, I believe. But his most famous books are East of Eden, which they made into a movie with James Dean. Grapes of Wrath, which they made into a movie with John Ford directed it. Henry Fonda starred in it. Travels with Charlie, which is a nonfiction book about him traveling the country in a camper in the early 60s with his dog Charlie. Winter of Our Discontent, and Of Mice and Men. Maybe you've heard of that one. Made it into a movie also. He could write about the common man like nobody else. East of Eden is possibly my favorite book of all time. I've read it several times, and it covers an arc of a family's life. And if you know what the quote is, if you know your Bible, Cain slew Abel out in the field. That's Adam and Eve's children. And he ran away to hide from the murder. And he went to live east of Eden in the land of Nod. And that's where that title comes from. Made into a really wonderful movie that Elia Kazan directed in 1954 or so with James Dean. It's actually his first movie ever made. He died. It's the only movie that James Dean ever made. If you know who the actor is, you know what I'm talking about. He made 3 movies. That's it in his lifetime. He's dead at 24 in a car wreck. Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant. When we get into film, we'll be talking about him. I think it's his best movie role. And it's only the last 60 pages of the novel. The novel's epic, a sprawling novel, covers a whole family's history. The movie only covers the last literally 60 pages of the novel. And but Elia Kazan captures something in the tone of the entire novel in that last bit. So these things are novels that changed everything. I'm not talking novels that were just fun to read, time consumers. I'm not really covering science fiction here. Kurt Vonnegut wrote some science fiction, which is wonderful. The Sirens of Titan. There's other great science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov. Ursula Le Guin, and some of those people aren't around anymore, but some of them are. And some science fiction goes deep. We're not talking spaceship science-fi. We're talking about futuristic, in the future sci-fi. The great sci-fi writer really didn't write anything in outer space. Philip K. Dick wrote some of the most wonderful futuristic novels, scary. They made his stuff into many movies. If you've seen Blade Runner, that's based on his short story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Total Recall is based on him, his novels. They made all his novels into movies. They're psychological thrillers set in a time where it isn't the present. Philip K. Dick is a wonderful example of a post-World War II writer from a different generation, kind of a hippie generation. He gobbled LSD and he wrote these crazy novels that are hard to explain but wonderful to behold. So sci-fi definitely should be in the canon. Stranger in a Strange Land. These are books that changed everything. Yes, they're considered sci-fi, but they're just as deep as any Steinbeck novel or Vonnegut novel. Absolutely. I think when the Star Wars generation happened, all sci-fi went up to outer space, and it became rather mechanical, good against evil, bad against good, with spaceships and ray guns. That's a different science fiction. Anyway, not to get off the sci-fi track, I'm going to sign another essay. One of these writers will probably be it. We'll see. We'll see how I feel when I sign it. I'll sign the next day or two. You have a week to do it. You know what I expect. Go deep. Go deep on the analysis. Don't give me a bio of their lives. That's not what I'm looking for. And you don't learn anything by that. How you learn things is absorb their work. No, we don't have time to read one of their books. I wish we did. Although you could read a Flannery O'Connor short story in half hour if you had it in you. So read some excerpts from the book. Look at some documentaries. I'm going to post some stuff right now. Take a look at. It's all on YouTube usually, or on Canopy, where we'll give a sketch of these people's lives. Excuse me. Pardon me. And they will open up new frontiers, which is what this class is hoping to give you guys. Ideas about world outside this world that we're living in now, a larger world out there. And the world is huge. And it's everywhere. And you're a part of it. And you can contribute to it. So maybe it's time you start writing your novel. And don't think you have nothing to say, because you have a lot to say. So say it. You text, right? You're thumbing your text? Well, do that for 300 pages. You got a novel. It's cathartic, meaning it's transcendent. You transcend the ordinary. And that's what we're trying to do here. That's it, folks. I'll see you next week.